Section 1. Thus, Ferdinand Bardamu, the novel's hero and narrator, begins to recount his adventures during World War I and beyond. Bardamu's journey started when he was sitting at a cafe with a friend, watching the parade of newly conscripted soldiers pass. Moved by the spectacle, Bardamu's companion patriotically claims the French are the finest nation in the world. Bardamu, distrustful of nationalist rhetoric and vanity, strongly disagrees. For him, the war shows, once again, how ordinary working people do all the difficult and dangerous work for the nation while the upper classes reap the profits. People like Bardamu and his companion are down in the ship's hold, heaving and panting, while the rich ones are up on deck with beautiful, pink and perfumed women on their laps. The patriotic appeals for heroic men to defend France merely seduce the poor, powerless men into sacrificing their lives for the honor and fame of being a hero, says Bardamu. At that moment, a regiment marches past and Bardamu suddenly jumps up enthusiastically saying, "I'll just go and see if that's the way it is." Bardamu spontaneously joins the recruits, and while he marches in the parade, people throw flowers from cafe terraces and cheer. The longer they march, the less attention they get. At the end of the parade, he tries to slip away, but he is trapped like a rat. Section 2. Bardamu finds himself in the army at the age of 20, fighting a war he does not believe in or understand. Bardamu says he has no idea why the Germans are shooting at him, since he has always been friendly and polite to them. To him, it seems the whole world has been caught up in some new feeling that he does not share. Bardamu is curious about their motives, but in the end, his only desire is to escape. Bardamu wonders if he might be the only coward among the others, who he calls stark-raving, heroic madmen in their desire to demolish everything on 2 continents. The frenzied rush of men astonishes him while they race about on horses, in cars, and on motorcycles, hordes of them always crouching, digging, shooting, screeching, and killing. Jail would be better, he thinks. Bardamu also thinks of how much he has changed since the days when the prison near his childhood home once frightened him. The warm safety of that jail, with no one shooting at him, seems far kinder than the horrors and idiocies of men at war. Men are what one should fear, he thinks, and nothing else. Bardamu wonders if he can stop the war, at least for himself, by refusing to fight. When he approaches his commander to resign, the man is blown up by a shell. A gruesome scene of missing heads follows, and Bardamu describes seeing blood bubbling like jam in a kettle, and the tangled, bleeding meat all over the field. Bardamu considers having himself taken prisoner, but cannot figure out how to approach the enemy without them shooting at him. Bardamu dreams, instead of returning to Paris as a hero and of being treated as a hero and of being treated as a hero as long as he lives. Bardamu fantasizes that he will eat free at restaurants. Heroes will pay their bills with little French flags, he thinks ironically. Then bullets fly at him from nowhere and interrupt his thoughts. Returning to his own regiment, he is sent to get the food supplies for everyone. Everyone meets in a meadow where the pigs are being slaughtered to get their rations. Blood and meat are spread out all over the grass, making Bardamu vomit until he is carried away. One of Bardamu's duties is to help with food supplies and also to act as messenger between the general and his regiment. To do this, he spends a lot of time wandering around in the night trying to find the village at which his men are stationed. Always exhausted, hungry, and terrified, his worst fear is of being sent into the treacherous darkness of forests. At times, to relieve their fears and boredom, He and the other men find whatever village is currently being burned and spend the long night watching it go up in flames. This is their only pleasure. Bardamu vows never to forget the human viciousness he has seen. We forget such things too easily, he says. But we should do our best to record it without changing one word, and then we can sink into our graves. Bardamu's commander is General des Entrailles, General Entrails, a French pun on guts, who cares only for his own comfort and who likes warm meals and pleasant rose gardens to rest in while he plots the campaign. Another officer Bardamu detests is Major Pincon. This physically unimpressive man is important because he has a map of the country. The map allows him to strategize how to send others to their death. Others who have no maps, observes Bardamu. The situation grows worse when all the villages are burned and the roads cannot hold all the fleeing civilians and the marching armies. The soldiers cannot go anywhere and they just sit stagnantly in place. Section 3. The war nightmares continue, and Bardamu survives many dreadful nights, filled with fear of attack, the back-breaking labor of moving supplies, and the uncertain dread of carrying messages from post to post. On one of his missions, he has to discover whether the German enemy has captured the village Noircourt. While he searches for the village, he dreams of escaping the certain death of the war by being taken prisoner. On the way, he meets a family mourning for their small son, who had been stabbed by the Germans. When he asks to buy a bottle of wine from them, the mother forgets her grief long enough to haggle the price. Moving on, Bardamu finally spots Noircourt around 2 a.m. Bardamu finds the village suspiciously calm, undamaged by flames or gunfire. It is here that he first meets Robinson, another French soldier, whose cynicism and desire to escape the war is even stronger than his own. Robinson is even considering surrendering, a far less honorable idea than Bardamu's own of being taken prisoner. Together, these two reluctant soldiers enter the sleeping town and locate the mayor's home. When they ring his bell, the mayor himself comes to the door. He is somewhat embarrassed to see them because he has been expecting the Germans instead. It seems he has cut a deal with the enemy to peacefully surrender the town. In return, the Germans will not harm the buildings or inhabitants. Defending his somewhat dishonorable capitulation, the mayor reminds them of his responsibility for the city's artistic heritage, such as the 15th century church. The mayor is anxious for Bardamu and Robinson to quickly depart because the presence of any French soldiers would put him in a compromising position when the Germans arrive. Bardamu and Robinson dread going back into the terrors of the night, but the mayor leaves them no choice. The two men leave Noircourt and go their separate ways. Section 4. Mysteriously, this chapter begins with Bardamu's admission into a hospital for a war wound that is never explained. Bardamu is moved to a Paris hospital because of the wound received in the war, of which he gives no details, and he even receives a military medal. On the home front, people are getting organized. Everyone wants to wear a uniform and participate in the struggle. Bardamu cynically notes that the men all have their fingers in each other's pockets or up women's skirts. People appear dutiful and patriotic on the surface, but their real motives are the familiar ones of profit and self-interest. Bardamu's medal attracts a pretty American volunteer, the sexy 23-year-old Lola. Lola has come to assist France, a country she passionately admires, with the wartime effort. Though Bardamu has an allergy to all heroism, whether verbal or real, he manages to put on a brave act for Lola so he can have access to her bed. Lola's body holds endless fascination for him. Lola's body holds endless fascination for him, while her mind has less. Bardamu has to kiss her often to stop her from chattering about heroism and patriotic duties to France. Lola's own wartime job is to oversee the supply of apple fritters to the hospitals. Since she cannot cook, Lola hires people to do the work while she merely shows up each morning to test the fritters. After gaining 2 pounds, she despairs of her work. Bardamu laughs at this and takes over her duty, since he says, "Lola was soon as afraid of fritters as I was of bullets." Wartime Paris overflows with war-related fundraisers and propaganda. Bardamu says that the only activities permitted are those of lying, sex, and dying. The atmosphere stinks of phoniness and hypocrisy. The sugar, coffee, shoes, and photos are all fakes, and the news is full of exaggerations and hate-filled myths. To get away from the city, Bardamu often takes Lola on outings. To the horse races, to the woods. On one such outing, they wander into a nearby abandoned carnival, where they find a house of mirrors, a little theater, candy stalls, and even a shooting gallery. Bardamu observes in the shooting gallery how the little tin soldiers are full of tiny bullet holes, evidently inflicted in a spirit of vicious glee. People shot at the tin soldiers and more people are still waiting to shoot at him, Bardamu suddenly thinks. Back in Paris, he hallucinates that everyone around him, the clerks, the people in the restaurants, the waiters, are being shot at also. Bardamu becomes mad with fear and is taken away by the military police. Section 5. Bardamu is taken to a hospital for soldiers who have psychological problems, or in his words, for men with sick or impaired patriotism. The war and its idealistic absurdities hemmed in by insane, bellicose platitudes have driven many to respond with insane, bellicose platitudes of every order. The hospital staff suspects the patients of faking their problems, and so they constantly scrutinize the men's behavior. Even the concierge, popular for her sexual generosity, is known for snitching to the authorities. From this hospital, the men are usually sent back to the front, shot for treason, or put in a real insane asylum. Lola visits Bardamu to ask if he has gone mad and whether they will cure him. Bardamu responds that there is no cure for fear, causing her to lose all respect for him. Bardamus protests that his death would mean nothing to his country, that battles of ages past are mere footnotes in history books, has no effect on her. Lola leaves him and does not return. Bardamu talks with a fellow patient, Pritchard, a teacher, just before the man is sent back to the front. Pritchard's strategy for getting kicked out of the army was to steal food since, by law, a thief cannot bear arms for his country. However, Pritchard has been pardoned so that he can continue to fight. Soon, he says, he will be fertilizing fields for his country in the form of a rotting corpse. Pritchard gives a brief history of how the common man became a patriotic soldier. When kings ruled, the monarch cared nothing at all for his subjects. Little by little, the philosophers started teaching people about freedom and about governing themselves, turning them from an illiterate mass of peasants into the newly educated public. Once capable of reading and filled with ideas of national glory, people were ready to fight upon hearing a few rousing phrases. No longer do soldiers need to be paid as mercenaries. Now they can be gotten for free. Heroes can be mass-produced, says Pritchard, and their deaths will earn them a tiny spot under the shadow of their city's war monument, no doubt to be cheaply and proudly set up by the lowest bidder. Section 6. Bardamu muses on the need for sex and love in wartime. Love is harder to give up than life, he admits, and thinks we spent our time either killing or adoring or both. We do all we can to reproduce, as though that would make us immortal. It does not. The place for satisfying such urges is Madame Herote's lingerie shop in the rich end of town. Aimé, Herote combines her physical attractiveness with her business acumen and thereby makes a small fortune. Imi, Herote's profit. Motivation is so strong and pure that Bardamu refers to her rapacious, pious, mercantile aims. Herote. Herote surrounds herself with beautiful, artistic friends, and Bardamu falls in love with an angelic violinist named Musin, who often performs for the troops. Their life together is quickly spoiled by her perpetual infidelities. Bardamu says his little frontline violinist often returns home at dawn from complicated nights where she mixes her musical performances with sexual ones, always within the highest social and military circles. Bardamu slowly realizes that there are two types of people, the rich and the poor, the gods and the mortals, and that Musin will always belong to the former. One should ask the price of things and people before setting one's heart on them, he observes. One night, he loses Musin forever when they have to hide underground in a shelter, and he refuses to go with her into the butcher's meat storage room, which evidently reminds him of battles and death. Bardamu is transferred to a new hospital with innovative methods. The doctor tries to gently coax the men into recovery by inspiring them with noble speeches about patriotic ethics. These speeches are reinforced, however, with electroshock therapy. The doctor thinks that the extreme conditions of war have shown the true nature of the human mind, and Bardamu heartily agrees this is true. However, he disagrees on what this true nature is really. Where the doctor sees altruism and patriotism, Bardamu sees only vile, self-serving hypocrisy. The nurses make a particularly bad impression on Bardamu. On the surface, they cheerfully support the young, frightened soldier boys in their care, but their only thoughts, he surmises, are of their own romantic future once the war ends. While they watch their patients die, they daydream of living longer and longer, to live and to love, to stroll in the park and copulate thousands and thousands and thousands of times. They look forward to the day their victorious officers will come marching home, here's all, to marry them. If all the world is a stage, Bardamu notes, then acting is the thing to do. Nothing is worse than a person who will not play any part, he adds. In order to keep up appearances in front of the women, the patients all start mouthing dramatic and exaggerated patriotic clays. They compete to tell the most adventurous war stories. Still, no women visit him anymore except his mother. To amuse themselves, all the men in the hospital begin to compete with each other to appear the most passionately patriotic. Yet, no one seems to notice or care that these proclamations are completely insincere and untrue. Absurdly, the hospital becomes so famous for its great success in curing cowardice that visitors pour in from all over, including famous actors, journalists, and politicians. The doctor delights in his fame and the prisoners enjoy the attention. To entertain their visitors, the men make up fantastic stories of their heroic battle experiences. Bardamu tells a lovely French actress of his exploits, and she helps to commission a poet to put Bardamu's deeds in verse. The piece is performed at one of Paris's most famous theaters, La Comédie Française. At the end, the audience clamors for the hero himself, but Bardamu's rival stands up in front of him and takes all the applause. Section 7. Bardamu is haphazardly united with some old acquaintances. Needing money, he and a former co-worker named Warius go to visit their old employer, a jeweler named Puta. Puta has, says Bardamu, a bit of the artistic temperament to him. Puta enjoys contemplating a shapely thigh. Mrs. Puta is at one with the cash desk and cares only for the business. The couple complains of the hardships of the war, the difficulties of driving at night, and people's children dying. They have none, but they then stop complaining and remind themselves that all is for the good of the country. The putas give the soldiers a paltry sum, 5 francs, before sending them on their way. Voirus has a better idea of who to hit up for money. Voirus has been going to the wealthy old parents of a soldier he fought with and telling them stories about their son recently killed. For this service, he might get 100 francs. Bardamu and Voirus head to the old couple's house, inventing a story while they go. But when they arrive, they see the old man already talking to Robinson. Robinson apparently has been doing the same thing and this time has beaten them to the house. Even so, the visit is useless because the old woman had just hung herself from grief. The 3 men split up. Voirus disappears for good, but Bardamu continues to run into Robinson when Robinson is always in the worst and most desperate conditions. Section 8. The army dismisses Bardamu, and he buys himself a ticket to Africa on a steamboat. In Africa, it is said that anyone can make a fortune, and Bardamu fantasizes about trading his razor blades for a house full of slaves and colorful birds. When the ship heads south, the passengers are overwhelmed by relentless, stifling heat. Just like in the war, the miserable conditions bring out people's true natures. The heat makes their rottenness rise to the surface. The stagnant filth sets in, and frantic unbuttoning begins. Bardamu is the only passenger who paid his own fare. The rest are on diplomatic or business missions. They regard him with unending suspicion and treat him like a criminal. Bardamu takes it in stride, reflecting that the number of people who must want you dead each day number in the hundreds, because there are always people waiting in lines behind you for the train or toilet, people in less nice apartments and other things. However, the crowd of passengers will not leave him alone, and they become more and more menacing. One hot night after dinner, they confront him and demand justification for his antisocial, disdainful behavior. Bardamu serves them an elaborate, patriotic speech invoking his service to France that leaves everyone confused and apologetic. Bardamu's patriotic gimmick works especially well on the men, and he spends the rest of the night flattering them and getting them drunk. At the end of this long, sleepless night, the ship anchors on the coast of Africa. Canoes of natives swarm around the ship, offering various services, and Bardamu sneaks away with them to escape his fellow passengers. The canoes ferry him to Bambola, Fort Gano, a name which forms an obscene pun in French. Bardamu finds the little African settlement filled with civil servants, traders, military men, and native blacks. Each group quarrels with the other, and the anarchy is held in check, like crabs in a basket by a secretive police force. The colors of objects are so vivid and unusual that Bardamu says you cannot get a good look at them. At night, this carnival atmosphere continues, while the hookers swarm the streets, whole families available for low prices. Bardamu cannot linger with them. However, since he needs to find a job, Bardamu finds a post as a manager of a trading post deep in the bush. Bardamu spends a week in Fort Gona before going to his new post. There, he spends his days getting to know the town and his nights trying to ignore the vermin, rat, scorpions, snakes, mice and mosquitoes, that besiege his bed. Bardamu learns from the town's lowest civil servant, a man in charge of building roads through the jungle, that all the roads disappear under new vegetation so quickly that they are lost before they are ever used. At the shop where he gets his supplies, Bardamu sees an African family come in to trade the rubber they have spent months collecting. The clerk, another African, but one who has adopted the white man's ways, gives the family a few small coins for their enormous harvest. When they appear confused at the transaction, he takes the coins away and ties a great green scarf around their child's neck, knowing they will not be able to refuse a gift placed upon their smallest child. Perplexed at having been cheated by one of their own people, they sadly leave. Section 9. Bardamu is still in Fort Gono, about to depart for his new post in the bush. Observing the dock workers, he marvels at the differences between the natives and the white men. The former must be driven to work with clubs and thus preserve some dignity, while the whites work voluntarily, having had their hearts and minds crammed full of the hope of becoming rich and powerful. Bardamu's boss, the director, takes great pride in having built an economy of peanuts and rubber. "This is life, Bardamu. Peanuts," he exclaims. However, his pride does not prevent him from an intense ambition to swindle the company. Bardamu's only ambition is to get sick and return to the hospital. While everyone else in the town seems intent on imitating a European lifestyle, despite the heat, cafes, dancing, long meals, he is attracted only to the local hospital where men suffer from malaria, lying flat on their backs between cigarette smoke and flies, covered in moldy sheets. The army and the business sectors both petition the hospital daily to get their workforce back, with little success. Wanting a break from the hardship of survival, Bardamu inquires about admission requirements and contemplates catching a disease. Meanwhile, the colonial life, with its 3-hour aperitifs, continues, with the only conversation revolving around the corruption of the governor, plans for swindling, and sex. Finally, Bardamu is put on a boat for the inland jungle. The painfully slow steamboat drops him off at the last civilized post, where a couple of army officers hold down the chaos. Bardamu spends a few days with them, before going by canoe to his final destination, and learns of their odd habits. The commander, Lieutenant Grappa, conducts a small army of natives who have no rifles, uniforms, or backpacks, but who are nonetheless capable of intricate drills with imaginary equipment, capable of lunging into empty space to disembowel illusory enemies with illusory bayonets. Lieutenants. Grappa has been waiting on his men's equipment for 2 years. Meanwhile, his assistant, Sergeant Alcaide, has prepared in advance a stack of reports claiming nothing to report. Their lives are testimonies to the futility of keeping up a civilization in the jungle. The steamboat comes once a month, and, for each visit, they have to rebuild the dock, which takes exactly 1 month to be eaten by mollusks. The natives show up every week for Grappa's legal hearings, which always end with floggings that they seem to enjoy. Payment for the native soldiers hardly ever arrives, but when it does, they have already used it up by taking credit from Alcaide for his tobacco. In essence, they work to be able to smoke and never see a cent of pay. All is illusory and temporary. All is for show. Alcaide is the only exception. Bardamu and Alcaide spend happy times fishing and teasing each other. Bardamu asks Alcaide where he is stashing all his money from the years of service in the jungle. Bardamu then finds a photo of a pretty young girl hidden in Alcaide's room. Alcaide reveals that he sends every cent of his pay towards supporting his brother's orphan daughter, whom he barely knows. Alcaide pays for a good school, for piano and English lessons, and for healthcare. Bardamu is stunned at the man's decision to sacrifice his whole life, spending it in torrid monotony, for the girl. Watching Alcaide sleep that night, Bardamu thinks that Alcaide looks like all the other people, whereas there ought to be some sort of birthmark that allows us to discern such good people from the bad. Section 10. Bardamu heads deeper into the jungle on a makeshift canoe, fearing what he will find. Bardamu's mission is to replace the present manager, take inventory, and restore order. After 10 days, he finds a dilapidated hut perched precariously between two boulders and a gruff-bearded man within. The man says, "It is a terrible place, with mud to drink and canned casserole to eat for the entire year, but it is better than the war. There is so little to do that one feels a fever, not by one's temperature. It is too hot for that, but by noticing one is less bored. The wild animal sounds at night are quite disturbing, therefore the man advises Bardamu to stuff his ears with cotton to silence them, like he does. Regarding the company's business, the man advises Bardamu not to care about them any more than they do about their staff, which is not at all. The man passes on the pathetic little inventory to Bardamu. Scraps of cotton, loincloths, shoes, and pepper, all of which is to be traded for rubber. The vast stores of canned casserole will help Bardamu survive, and he can drink muddy water. As for the cash box, Robinson promises to leave it in case Bardamu ever decides to abandon his post and head for Europe. The man's name is hard to catch, but Bardamu dimly remembers that the man's name, Robinson, is familiar to him. They reminisce about Europe and agree that their present hellish situation is preferable to the war. Robinson reminds Bardamu to stuff his ears before sleeping, and Bardamu complies even though he suspects a vile trick. Sure enough, in the morning, Robinson and the cash box are gone. Bardamu half-heartedly sets about fixing the shack and taking up his post. Weeks pass in utter boredom. Bardamu's only companion is a chicken until he eats it to break the monotony of the canned casseroles. The natives raid the hut and rob all the goods. The rains come and make a porridge of Bardamu's merchandise, his hopes and his account books. This means he has a new problem, since he is responsible for the company's inventory and accounts. Bardamu has no idea how to repair the situation. Furthermore, he is haunted by his mother's idea that whoever will steal a pin will steal a pound and end up murdering his mother. Fortunately, Mom left him with a second adage, "Nothing purifies like fire," and so he sets the tiny hut aflame, and then, unsure of where to go, he sets off into the woods. Distrusting everyone and fearing punishment for leaving his post, he decides to head into the unknown, wild bush, just like Robinson had done. Section 11. Bardamu makes his way through the jungle with the help of some natives, even being carried at times when he is too sick with malarial fever to walk. The natives deliver him to a priest hospital in the coastal town of Santapta. Bardamu is delirious in bed for a few days, wondering why the natives failed to just throw him in the river or eat him. Bardamu soon learns why they did not when, through his fever, he senses that whatever he is lying on is always in movement. Bardamu also feels the air grow cooler. Bardamu realizes that while he lay dying, he has been swindled. Bardamu was sold to a sea captain who hopes to revive him and thus get a new oarsman. Relatively content to escape the heat, eat properly, and be headed somewhere new, Bardamu recovers and sets about rowing to a destination, a place about which he is too timid to ask. After weeks of sailing, he wakes and sees a surprising sight from his porthole. The ship docks in New York City, much to Bardamu's delight. Bardamu imagines contacting friends, for wealthy Lola must be there, and no doubt his pal Robinson has already carved a niche in the business community. Bardamu counts his main, employable skill as the ability to count and classify fleas, a trick he picked up on the ship's long haul. Bardamu is sure the Americans, who are fans of all kinds of efficient techniques, will find a use for his new interest in flea populations and statistics. Ignoring the warnings of his shipmates, he deserts. Bardamu has trouble with the local authorities, but he manages to present himself as being good with statistics and a useful expert in flea counting. Bardamu is put to work, he says, counting all the foreign fleas who arrive in the States each day and classifying them by gender. By this metaphor, he means that he takes a job in the immigration office. The job is a decent one, but then he is asked to deliver some statistics to Manhattan. So he shoves some papers in his pocket in order to look like a businessman and heads for the island. Upon landing, he is swept away by a crowd of people on the streets and is disappointed to find that, in America, there can be poor people, just like in Europe. Section 12. Bardamu compares Manhattan's banks to Europe's cathedrals. Just like in church, faithful bank customers enter and go to a small booth where they whisper through the grill, just like one goes to whisper one's confession. Then they put the holy bread near their hearts, safe in their wallets instead of in their mouths. Bardamu ungenerously comments on what he observes about the New Yorkers. The men have monotonous, broad faces, and the women look only at the shop windows. Bardamu checks into a grand and luxurious hotel where he is assigned to a tiny room on the top floor. Observing his neighbors, he is surprised at how tired the Americans look and how little the couples speak to each other. They strike him as fat, docile animals, used to being bored. Bardamu finds it sad that people should go to bed without even thinking of their larger purpose or whether they are getting what they originally hoped for out of life. Instead, they all seem preoccupied with figuring out how to survive the next grueling day. Bardamu decides to go out to revive his own energy and morale and settles for a movie. Though he is well aware that the screen shows nothing but a mirage of moving light, the film gives people a choice of dreams that move their souls and help them get through a few more days of the outside world. For his own dreams, he admits to picking the sexy ones, which are most likely to warm the soul. When it comes to miracles, take the ones that will stay with you, he advises. Section 13. Bardamu runs out of money and continues to muse about the differences between the life of a rich person and a poor one. Bardamu imagines how the forbidding, hostile world around him would be transformed if only he had money. Then he would finally be free of the long frenzy of desires unable to be fulfilled. At a cheap cafeteria, he is moved by the smile of a pretty waitress, proposes marriage to her, and is thrown out of the cafeteria. Back in his little room that night, he shouts at the indifferent crowd on the street, calling out insults, crying for help, and all the things he says he does not dare say to them in the daytime, but no one notices him. The taller and bigger the city, the less people care about each other, he concludes. Having nowhere else to turn, Bardamu tracks down his ex-girlfriend Lola to ask for a loan, in spite of his great resentment toward her. In the past, he reflects, they were young and easily found excuses for each other's bad behavior. But now it has become clearer to him that people do rotten things to each other to survive and get ahead. Lola is not as surprised to see Bardamu as she is annoyed. Their common past is of no interest to her now, and talking about the war unpleasantly reminds her of her age. Lola's well-furnished apartment and arrogant airs make it clear to Bardamu that she has become wealthy, seemingly in some mysterious, slightly unrespectable manner. Bardamu exchanges friendly insults with her American colleagues. They think Europe is a museum full of old-fashioned, erotic lunatics. Bardamu tells them their city is a nauseating carnival which fails despite all their overwrought efforts. Lola, despite her riches, has no interest in helping Bardamu. Lola's only thoughts are of herself. At the moment, she yearns to adopt a child and wonders if Bardamu has sired any nice children she might take in and raise as her own. Bardamu shows as little interest in her maternal fixation as she does in his survival quest. Lola tries to send him away into the night with a few dollars. As they are parting, he asks about Lola's mother, and his concern suddenly rouses Lola's full attention. Lola's mother has liver cancer. Lola is terrified by the severity of the illness, but she feels certain the specialists will save her mother like they have promised. When she asks Bardamu, the medical student, if he thinks her mother will recover, he spitefully tells her cancer of the liver is absolutely incurable. Bardamu also points out that the disease is hereditary. Bardamu has found Lola's vulnerable point for the first time in his life and pushes his advantage to the limit. Naturally, the doctors promise to cure her mother, he says, so she will pay their exorbitant fees. Wouldn't you do the same in their place? He asks her. Lola sees he is right and her strength crumples before him. Bardamu refuses to leave her alone until she pays him $100. Triumphantly, Bardamu leaves the city and heads for Detroit. Section 14. Bardamu looks for a job in Detroit and is hired by Ford, where he is warned never to look intelligent because what the factory needs are monkeys, not men. The grueling work turns the men into machines. All day long, men are whirling, striking, clanking, and calibrating. To revive himself, Bardamu begins to frequent a brothel. A kind prostitute named Molly takes an interest in him and begins to try to save him from his factory job and wandering ways. Molly buys Bardamu a suit, supports him so he can look for better work, such as translating, and encourages him to stay with her. Yet, Bardamu thinks it is too late for him. Bardamu thinks it is too late for him. He has been the restless type for so long now that it has become his nature. Bardamu fears that the passion spent on Molly will reduce his long-standing drive to unearth all the most wonderful and most awful secrets of life, for the true mistress of all real men is life. On a late-night ride in the suburbs, Bardamu loses himself in the empty streets, where tired men walk like shadows, too tired to speak after working the night shift cleaning offices. These Americans were less anxious, perhaps since they had sunk to the very bottom of things. Here, Bardamu runs into his acquaintance Robinson again and learns Robinson has not become a successful businessman, but rather a janitor. They agree it is time to return to France. Bardamu tells Molly about his decision, and she shows a real unhappiness. Molly understands, however, that he has a sickness of wanting to know more and more, and she takes comfort in the fact that Bardamu is doing exactly what he truly wants. Bardamu himself is not so certain and is genuinely, deeply sad to leave her. Later, when he looks back, he will be thankful for Molly's kindness and the dreams she rekindled in him. Section 15. Bardamu returns to France, finishes his medical studies, and opens his office in a dreary suburb Guerin, Rancy, loose translation, rancid rabbit, pen. Rancy is yet another impoverished place where masses of unkempt, uninspired people daily crush themselves into the streetcars, long electric sewers, for fear of losing their mundane jobs. Bardamu studies the people with all the more interest now that he is a doctor. Studying has given him both pride in himself and a sharper eye for understanding people. Bardamu feels closer to people, animals, everything, and prepares himself to plunge straight into the heart of things. Yet, patients only slowly trickle into his new practice, in spite of the fact that he is the cheapest doctor in town. Often, he even treats people simply out of curiosity, since people seem ready to confide all their troubles and display all their miseries to him. One family he often treats is composed of his concierge and her nephew, Baber, an orphan. The aunt is a hypochondriac who only calls Bardamu when she wants a free consultation or an anti-vice prescription for her nephew, who masturbates. Don't make it sweet, whatever you do. He steals enough sugar from me already, she requests, denying the child even that pleasure. Then she asks Bardamu to visit her friend, Madame Henriel, whose family also needs a cheap doctor. Bardamu consults the Henriel family, whose one and only purpose in life has been to buy a house. Bardamu infers that they had thought of house buying even before they were married, first separately, then together. Now that the house has been paid for, the Henriels have space in their minds for other thoughts, most of which revolve around preserving their newly paid-for security. They spend little money, but now that the house is paid for, they allow themselves to get the daily paper. Their greatest fear is that their son, who is in the unstable business of dealing in feathers, will find himself in financial trouble and ask them for a loan. This idea disturbs them so much they have vowed in advance to refuse him. Another problem is Monsieur Henriet's dizzy spells, which came to his attention after the house was paid for and he had time to notice them. Monsieur Henriel now fears dying of high blood pressure. Bardamu thinks the man is simply afraid, in general, and needs to attach his fear to something specific. First poverty, now death. Henriel wants Bardamu to commit her mother-in-law to the convent or asylum, since she refuses to leave the tiny house in the yard where she lives, screams at the family, and pisses in the corners. The mother-in-law threatens to get a job at the age of 80 if the family refuses to hand over her pension money that they put in safekeeping. Grandma Henriel barricades herself inside because she thinks that opening the door would let hostile forces burst in, grab her and finish her off. Forces burst in, grab her and finish her off. Grandma Henriel lets Bardamu inside after half an hour, and he finds her to be the most lucid, smiling, sane person he has ever met. Grandma Henriel is filthy and discontent, he says, but merry. Grandma Henriel's voice is bright and full of life, and her voice has a vibrant tone from many years of singing and storytelling. Grandma Henriel fears nothing from within. Grandma Henriel fears nothing from within, being absolutely sure of her own mind, and the only dread she knows is directed at the outside world. It is as though cold, horror, and death could only come from that direction. Bardamu is tempted, nevertheless, to commit her, since the family is ready to pay him an enormous fee and recommend new patients to him. Pretending that committing the old woman is for her own good, the Henriels accidentally mention that they would also like to rent out her house, revealing their true motives. The old woman surmises they are plotting against her and returns in a livid rage, yelling such accurate insults at Bardamu that he runs away. Section 16. Bardamu is called for the most desperate, shameful cases. After the Henriel family, he visits a beautiful young woman in a dangerous condition after having had an abortion, her third, and whom he cannot help but admire for her exquisite form and her unabashed love of pleasure. While the girl is bleeding to death, her mother rants incessantly about the family honor and repeatedly refuses to send the girl to the hospital, where immediate surgery to save her could be performed. Baybert's aunt, the concierge, wants her tip for showing Bardamu these cases. But in fact, Bardamu is rarely paid himself. Bardamu cannot bring himself to collect the last 5 francs from the poor and the wicked for the man who does so remains a louse to his dying day. Taking payment is the part of his job he hates so much. He tries to avoid it and therefore rarely gets his fee. When he sinks into poverty himself, he sells his possessions, the phonograph and bike Molly gave him, his records. The neighborhood continues to depress him with its squalor, such as the neighbors who indulge in abusing their child as a means of foreplay. In the heart of these squalid circumstances, Robinson appears in Bardamu's office. Robinson has a terrible cough, caused by his job, which is some sort of menial labor involving acids. Bardamu is at the end of his patience with his clients. In the middle of an examination of a sick, illegitimate child, Bardamu loses his cool when the child begins to loudly bawl at his touch. You'll have plenty of time for bellowing. Save your strength. There'll be enough misery to melt your eyes and your head if you don't watch out. He informs the child. Fee informs the child. The family, appalled, throws him out with no fee and spreads the news of his conduct around town. Bardamu thinks of leaving town, but in the end, he does not bother to do so. Section 17. Beber, the concierge's nephew, of whom Bardamu is relatively fond, falls sick with typhoid fever. Several doctors are consulted, but Bardamu is finally given charge of the child. The entire neighborhood takes an interest, visiting, giving advice, and cooked Brussels sprouts to the aunt. Bardamu, genuinely concerned, tries everything, and when he cannot cure the child, he goes to the prestigious Bardamu Institute to ask for advice. Bardamu means long life, and Céline is obviously referring to the Pasteur Institute in Paris. The institute appears to him to be a labyrinth of corridors, empty of people, but filled with mice suffocating in jars, cigarette butts, gutted animal corpses, chipped beakers, and urine smells. The men of science arrive. Bardamu describes them as gray-haired, umbrella-carrying schoolboys, stupefied by the pedantic routine, riveted by starvation wages for their whole adult lives to these little microbe kitchens, warming up mixtures of vegetable scrapings, asphyxiated guinea pigs, and other nondescript garbage. Trusted to analysis, their customers' urine and sputum. The noble enterprise of pursuing scientific truth is rather just the effort to preserve one's niche in the system by proving another man's theory wrong. Bardamu is looking for his old mentor, the famous Dr. Paraprine, who is a typhoid expert. Bardamu finds the renowned scientist in his laboratory, spitting in the corners, unshaven and sprinkled with dandruff. Dr. Paraprine cannot give Bardamu much advice about typhoid, since in the years of study he has learned so many, so diverse and so often contradictory things that he no longer has a clear opinion. Just do your best, he advises. Then he embarks on a rant against the clownish trade of medical research that he practices. To keep his position, he has to endlessly publish new work, though he claims to publish the same article over and over with innocuous tin. Dr. Paraprine would prefer to find some insignificant area of research, free of constant competition and rivalry, where he could work undisturbed by enemies and disciples. Dr. Paraprine contemplates a study of hemorrhoids relative to central heating and diet. Perhaps he would receive a hygiene award for such work, he jokes. Meanwhile, Dr. Paraprine's assistant continues to tenderly care for the important microbes, closing the door on the incubator as if it were a tabernacle. Seeing this, Dr. Paraprine compares science to a religion and notes that the priest's assistant continues believing long after the priest himself has stopped. Bardamu lingers in Paris, watching the sun set over the Seine River, watching life in the city for a while. Men fish without catching anything. Booksellers close their stalls. A butcher torments a pig in front of an eager crowd. When he arrives home, he sees people leaving his house, where Beber also lives, in tears and correctly assumes that the child has died. Bardamu wonders if he is to blame. Section 18. People only talk about their own troubles, which they hope to unload by falling in love. Bardamu muses that this works for a while, but eventually fails, and then people recommence with the same trick. You're pretty, mademoiselle. As they age, people's faces slowly reveal more of their unhappiness. By a certain age, a man's soul has climbed from his belly to his face, giving him a hideous grimace that takes a lifetime to compose, he reflects. People start to visit him, among them Grandmother Henriette and Robinson. Grandma Henriette wants to ensure Bardamu will never commit her, and also seems to enjoy socializing with his neighbors. Robinson asks for various favors, such as a hospital job and a cure for his cough. Working in the hospital appeals to Robinson because people are less frightening when they are down, he says, and he accuses Bardamu of having the same motives for doing medicine. They spend Sunday afternoon drinking in a cafe, and Robinson gets a fancy idea about becoming a chauffeur. Sunday ideas, Bardamu calls this line of dreaming. On Sunday evening, after a whole day of alcoholic freedom, everybody lets go, he claims. On this particular Sunday, two people in the same house become gravely ill. An elderly man lies dying of cancer, while meanwhile, a woman has a miscarriage with some serious complications. Bardamu's arrival on the scene irritates the midwife, who had been running the show. Bardamu tries to cooperate with her, but she resents him taking her starring role and, of course, cutting into her fee. Bardamu locates the woman's husband and advises immediate hospitalization, but the man cannot make any decisions, probably fearing the expense. Finally, Bardamu leaves them all in disgust and again, with no payment. By coincidence, Bardamu runs into Robinson on the same night. Robinson is carrying a load of wood to the Henriette's house to build a rabbit pen for them. The old woman introduced him to her family, and now they have hired him. Robinson hints that Grandma Henriette will soon have some medical problems. It seems that the rabbit pen is going to be a trap, laden with explosives, apparently used as a sort of burglar alarm. In this case, Robinson and the family plan to keep Grandma Henriette ignorant of the danger and thereby eliminate her. Since a similar accident with rabbits and explosives happened a few months earlier, they think her death will look like an accident. Robinson received 1,000 francs for the idea and 250 for the execution. Robinson is fed up with trying to make an honest living, and besides, the old woman is near death anyway. Bardamu is somewhat surprised at Robinson's new vocation for murder, but it strikes him as somewhat of an improvement over the general hypocrisy, half hateful, half benevolent, seen in so many others. Section 19. Bardamu is called to a carnival for a patient. Bardamu notes, dryly, that the shooting gallery has all the same figures, plus airplanes now, undeniably. Humans are making progress. The children at the carnival, he reflects, still think it's pure generosity that makes the grown-ups put on such a show. The children are too young to perceive the profit motive behind the raucous smiles. Bardamu goes to deal with a barmaid's kitchen wound, but he ends up meeting Robinson, who lets him in on more details of the sordid Henriette murder scheme. Robinson has started blackmailing the family. Bardamu wonders if he should try to dissuade his friend or report him, but he ends up doing neither. The barmaid goes home with a couple of her customers to whom she provides another service on the side. This helps her support her young child in the country. With all the depravity accumulating around him, Bardamu ends the evening thinking the night had come home. A short while after the carnival, Bardamu receives a request to visit the Henriette residence to attend to an emergency. Madame Henriette brusquely shows him inside, where he collides with Grandma Henriette, who has come to gloat over the disaster. The monsters. They tried to kill me. I was taking too long to die, she proclaims. Naturally, I don't want to die, she adds. The elder Henriette woman launches into a brilliant comic tirade, describing every detail of the how Robinson exploded the rabbit pen, commissioned by her family, in his own face, and now his murderer's blood will stink for a long time to come on their own mattress. For the family has hidden the injured, perhaps blinded, Robinson upstairs in their bedroom, fearing scandal and police interference. Bardamu notes that the murder attempt has actually done the old woman a world of good. The attempt on her life revived her and let her feel morally superior to the rest of them, and it gave her something to torment her family with for the rest of her days. Grandma Henrielle now has a role to play besides that of the complaining old woman. Old age means not having a passionate part to play anymore. Seeing your theater fold up on you, Bardamu notes and sees how happy the old woman is to play her new part, that of the avenger. Grandma Henrielle is especially amused because the family will be stuck supporting poor Robinson, since his injury is their own fault, and they cannot report his case to the hospital or police without facing prosecution for attempted murder. Section 20. The incident of Robinson's accident is hushed up, even though the neighbors gossip about it. Robinson has been blinded in the accident, but he fails to realize this for a while, since his eyes are bandaged. When he finally discovers that he is shut into his own private darkness, he breaks down in tears. Though he threatens to kill himself, Bardamu can tell he is not serious about it. Everyone wants to die pleasantly, under the right conditions, thinks Bardamu, and a despairing suicide probably does not meet Robinson's criteria. Under different conditions, Robinson might be delighted to die, however. Death is somewhat like marriage, Bardamu concludes. Bardamu takes a new job supervising a government-funded tuberculosis center, which pays well. Bardamu's patients actually come to him with the hopes of having the disease, since this would entitle them to a government pension for life. On the other hand, remaining in good health would require them to go back to work. One evening, a local priest, the abbot Protiste, visits him to make a request. Bardamu is distracted by the repulsive state of the man's lips and tongue. He has a gum disease. Bardamu then reflects upon the dual character of speech, the idealistic content of our words contrasted with their actual origin, a slimy organ also used for food consumption. The abbot Protiste has been asked by Madame Henrielle to find a cheap religious institution to house both Robinson and the grandmother. Though his nervousness at joining them in their web of deceptions shows in his manner, he does present a fairly good plan. Abbot Protiste knows a small church with a cellar full of mummified corpses that attracts paying tourists, and it needs a guide and caretaker. Bardamu's job will be convincing Robinson to go along with the plan, and for this, he will receive 1,000 francs. Bardamu thoroughly reassures the terrified Robinson and demands a double commission. As for his role in the affair, Bardamu, half joking, claims that everyone would like to betray someone for profit, but the chance is rarely had. With Robinson and the grandmother out of the way, Bardamu is free to concentrate on his practice. But instead, he falls sick and loses so much income that he decides to close up shop. Bardamu heads out of town in the middle of the night, passing the prostitutes, the toll clerks, the beggars, and the terraput, that is, Paramount movie theater. Bardamu pauses in a nearby cafe. Bardamu runs into Dr. Paraprine, his old medical advisor, who has since lost his job at the institute and fallen on the hard times. Now he has some absurd post studying the effects of movies on mentally handicapped children, which explains his presence at the theater. Apparently, the kids loved the films and watched them many times, being without memory. Bardamu explains his own flight from Rancy and discovers there is a post open for a stage extra at the Taraput. Bardamu takes the post on a whim to be around the dancing girls, all English and very persistent at wagging their bottoms. Section 21. While employed at the Taraput, Bardamu leads a worry, free, decadent life. Bardamu takes up residence in a hotel and finds himself among students who all share the same hope of achieving happiness within 20 years from hard work. The students already see themselves at the last square. surrounded by a small but incomparably precious family, which they would, however, seldom notice. These students would not venture into the world's darker corners, but they would only read about them in the morning papers. Still, some of the students are familiar with the various brothels in Paris, and so they show Bardamu around these areas. Bardamu meets a pimp named Pomone, who has seen so many perverse desires that he has developed a classification system. Lunatics here, masochists and sadists there, those seeking a governess to the side. Dealing in amusements has become a bureaucratic chore for him. His desk filed high with impassioned requests mailed to him. The girls in the movie house chorus line entertain Bardamu until they introduce a song so sad that it ruins the theater for him forever. The words are about lost love, but Bardamu sees much more in it than that. Bardamu sees the whole misery of the human condition, bound to work incessantly to survive and always miss getting the pleasures one craves. When you're young and you don't know, you mistake everything for love trouble, he concludes. A new Polish girl joins the chorus line and Bardamu befriends her. When her long-distance lover suddenly dies of the flu, Bardamu does his best to help her deal with the tragedy. The two go out drinking and Bardamu gets so intoxicated that he starts hallucinating, seeing all the deceased people he knows in the clouds like angels. Bardamu and the girl get caught up in the clouds and merge with the fog and mist. Finally, they get trapped over the English Channel somewhere. Section 22. One day, when passing through Rancy, Bardamu stops out of curiosity. Bardamu pays the Henruilis a visit and finds Monsieur Henruil dying of heart failure. Bardamu advises the wife to remove his dental plate so he can breathe easier, but her husband had already flushed it down the toilet. The wife is irritated because the plate was part gold and quite valuable. The abbot protest unexpectedly returns with the money owed Bardamu for his help in setting Robinson and Grandma Henruil in the crypt. Show business in Toulouse, a city in the south of France. It seems that Grandma Henruil delights in talking to the tourists, while Robinson has become engaged to one of the local girls. Out of a sense of duty, as well as of morbid curiosity, Bardamu pays them a visit. Robinson had developed a taste for shady undertakings and wondered whether he could go deeper into the night with Robinson. Bardamu takes a train to Toulouse and delights for a while in the unfamiliar city. It is a time when one can imagine that all the people there are nice, he thinks. The park is a nice place to linger, but at his age, people might imagine he is a pedophile, so he opts for the pastry shop, as fancy as a brothel, and loses himself in thought while listening to the shop girls' conversations. Some delicate, personal dilemma has them very heated, but their speculative incompetence restricted them to an imprecise sort of hatred, and they never reach a conclusion. Other customers come in, and one woman refuses sweets, going into an elaborate and graphic discussion of her digestion and bowels to justify this position. These serious discussions of spite and feces put an abrupt end to Bardamu's idealized vision of the inhabitants of Toulouse. Bardamu takes a carriage to the church that employs his friends, where he immediately meets Robinson's young fiancée, whose delicate, wiry body and precise features charm him on the spot. Besides this, she is capable and ambitious. The girl immediately leads him into the church's crypt, where she accepts Bardamu's sexual advances with enthusiasm and good humor. Later, he learns her name is Madelon. Madelon assures him of her sincerity in marrying his pal Robinson. The crypt itself is a shadowy place, where quicklime has caused the bodies to mummify over the last 500 years or so. The 26 corpses were little more than remnants of skin and bones, but recognizable by their clothing and sizes. Bardamu makes out a giant, 2 women, a hunchback, and even a baby with a bib. Grandma Henruelle earns 100 francs per day from the stiffs, beating them like drums and making them like drums and making them work like circus performers. Bardamu immediately makes a note of the steep, rickety stairs, as difficult to negotiate as a ladder. Section 23. Old Grandma Henruelle gives a lively show in the crypt, despite the fact that she is forbidden to raise the prices. Grandma Henruelle points out the missing eyes, full sets of teeth, and leathery tongues. The old woman looking death in the eye and laughing at it was a sight worth seeing, Bardamu notes, and the tourists flowed in to see her. Robinson has so little to do that his main hobby is complaining about life in general and about Grandmother Henruelle in particular. Grandma Henruelle's energetic tours bring a lot of money, and Robinson, who rarely even enters the crypt, wants a bigger share. Robinson thinks he has been taken for a sucker. Bardamu is disappointed in his friend's new middle-class bourgeois attitudes because Robinson now thinks only of money, comfort, and family life, having let go of his former curiosity and lust for adventure. Bardamu warns Madelon that Robinson can be difficult at times, and while he is teaching her a thing or two, tries to instruct her in how to recognize and avoid venereal diseases, a danger with her level of sexual curiosity, he thinks. Madelon takes great offense at his assuming she is a libertine just because she slept with him. Madelon declares herself respectable and him a beast. Bardamu stays on and takes a trip to the countryside with Robinson and Madelon. Boat rides and overpriced restaurants fill their time until they overhear music from a festive houseboat docked nearby. The 3 of them sit, envying the boat and wildly speculating on its price, like people do when their minds cannot even imagine the sort of money needed for it. After a confrontation with the houseboat's dog, the owner good-naturedly invites them all aboard to help celebrate his birthday. The owner is a young painter, an artist, and thus certain eccentricities, such as spontaneously socializing with the locals, are tolerated and are even expected of him. For a few hours, rich and not so rich can be reconciled in the spirit of the festivity and under the benevolent grace of the young artist. The 3 feel compelled to improve their speech and manners amid these aristocratic hosts. Robinson, among the colonial settlers, invents phony memories of Africa, while Bardamu lets them know he is a distinguished Parisian physician. All the party is united in a false show of camaraderie, in which all become fuddled by an effort to suffuse the moment with more charms and marvels than ever before experienced. When the drinks and cheer wear off, Bardamu and his companions slip away from the party. On the way home, Bardamu overhears the banal, intimate dialogue between his friends. Madelon hopes Robinson will regain his eyesight, but pretends to worry he will then chase other women. Madelon worries about the influence of Robinson's friend, Bardamu, whom she calls a libertine and skirt chaser. Bardamu is likened to a dog, ready to jump every last one of them, she adds vengefully. Robinson agrees with her, and they amuse themselves by speculating on the details of Bardamu's sexual habits, before deciding to exclude him from their lives for good. A couple of days later, Bardamu is packing to leave Toulouse when he receives news that Grandmother Henruelle has fallen down the crypt stairs and broken her collarbone and skull. Bardamu will not even to go take a look and explains. I knew all I wanted to know. Bardamu boards the first train out of the city without saying goodbye to Robinson or Madelon. Section 24. Bardamu returns to Paris, where his resourceful colleague, Dr. Paraprine, finds him a post working with magnetic wave therapy in an asylum, or rest home, for the depressed and insane. The 2 ways Humans express their innermost being, Bardamu concludes, are war and madness. The decades-long effort to avoid reverting to our true natures is what exhausts us so much. Bardamu's new boss, Barraton, does his best to keep their asylum up to date because the families are always demanding more up-to-date modes of treatment. At discount sales and second-hand shops, he acquires a variety of electric, pneumatic, and hydraulic equipment to stay ahead of rival asylums. The routine work of running the asylum bores him after so many years, and he likes nothing more than to hear stories of Bardamu's travels. Bardamu is paid badly, but he is content enough, in spite of his nightmares, of Robinson, and the constant need to make sure the mental patients do not try to kill him when he passes by them. Madmen are more prone to murder than ordinary people, he notes. Months pass amid these eccentric lunatics and equally bizarre colleagues. Barraton decides Bardamu can also be put to work as an English teacher for his daughter, and the three of them sit down to regular lessons. But since the little French girl is incapable of learning a word, her father learns it for her, and soon English becomes his obsession. After months of devotion, Barraton has refashioned himself almost completely along Anglo-Saxon lines, and yet his mind also begins to wander. During their reading of English history one day, he loses all interest in the world around him and merely repeats the history text in a daze. That night, he announces his departure and his decision to put Bardamu in charge of their little institute. Barraton's soul has been drained by 40 years of prudent, stultifying work. Barraton wants to have adventures while he still can and is headed to England. Section 25. Many quiet months pass for Bardamu while running the institute, interrupted only once by news of Robinson, brought by Abbot Protiste, who suspects Robinson of murdering Grandma Henruille and also complains of the man's sudden departure from Toulouse. Not long after, Bardamu is dismayed to receive a visit from Robinson. Robinson has regained his sight and claims to have come to Paris to find a job, preferably at the institute Bardamu now oversees. In fact, Robinson would like to be admitted and pass himself off as a lunatic because he is fleeing some urgent trouble. Robinson admits to sending Grandmother Henruille to her death on the stairs, since she annoyed him, and also because he and Madelon were to inherit the business upon Grandma Henruille's death. No one suspects him, since he concealed the return of his eyesight from all except Madelon. Despite the success of the murder and his pending marriage, Robinson still is not satisfied with the arrangements in Toulouse. In fact, he quickly grows disenchanted with Madelon and wants only for her and her mother to leave him alone. Bardamu explodes with frustration at Robinson, reminding him that everyone had combined forces to give him an easy job, welcomed him into their homes, and trusted him, in spite of his poverty and criminal record. In return, Robinson simply puts on airs and starts complaining again. In short, Robinson makes himself unbearable. Robinson deserves jail, no less, says Bardamu. The real problem is Madelon, whose obsessive love put a suffocating hold on him. Madelon is in love, hence she is crazy, and now anything crazy is right up her alley. He fretfully explains. Robinson wanted to travel, and she insists on following everywhere. Listening to that flapdoodle made me miserable, he adds. They argued for weeks but still stayed together, mostly out of fear, he mentions, since she and he were accomplices in the murder. Madelon's fury at having her love rebuffed has no limits, though Robinson insisted he had never truly hurt her, that is, never got her pregnant or gave her any diseases. Madelon is willing to do anything except let him go. She was in love, all right, a real pest. Robinson concludes. Robinson tried to get rid of her love by pretending to have fits of dementia. For a while, this calmed her passion, but only temporarily. Now, he has come to hide in Bardamu's asylum to escape Madelon and to hide from the police in case she reports the murder out of sheer spite. Madelon would get great satisfaction from seeing him in prison, even if it meant she also had to go along. Bardamu initially has a hard time mustering much sympathy or interest for his friend's situation. Bardamu lets Robinson stay for a while on the condition that he looks for work outside, and a routine of furtive monotony ensues, which lasts for several months. Robinson cheers up when spring arrives. The trouble starts up again when Bardamu spies Madelon lurking around the Institute. Bardamu says nothing about this to Robinson, but his uneasiness leads him to visit Rancy again, as though a visit to the past would clear his thoughts. But he realizes that the people there have nothing more to teach him about the dark regions of the human soul. They lack the education and the strength. Whatever mysterious quest Bardamu is on, this little village holds no answers to it. Section 26. At the Institute, Bardamu receives several sinister letters concerning his relations with Robinson. Bardamu suspects Madelon and begins fearing a visit from her, or worse, from the police. Bardamu and his colleagues habitually play cards with a local policeman, Gustave Mandamore. One Sunday, Gustave mentions having seen a woman stalking the Institute who fits Madelon's description. Robinson panics at learning Madelon's whereabouts, and yet he refuses to take any action about it. Neither going back with her nor running away to a new place appeals to him, and even the fear that she will report him to the police means little. Finally, one Saturday night, Madelon pays Bardamu a visit. Filled with his authority as head of an institute, Bardamu brusquely tells her to get lost and to leave the sick Robinson alone. When she angrily resists, he slaps her, since he has always imagined that a slap would remove a person's mask and let their real emotions show. Madelon, however, hides her face and leaves. Inexplicably, as time passes, Robinson begins to see Madelon again on his own. Bardamu himself takes a new girlfriend too, a beautiful young nurse named Sophie. At Sophie's suggestion, Bardamu tries to restore friendly relations with Madelon and Robinson. They all agree to spend the evening together at the carnival. The bumper cars, photography booths, and shooting gallery fail to restore harmony between them, and all the violence and joy of the carnival merely irritates Madelon. Once all the thrills are exhausted and all the snacks consumed, they merely quarrel, and Bardamu decides to end the evening and head home in a taxi. Robinson and Madelon continue to quarrel in the taxi. A livid Madelon insists that such dirty, rotten men as they cannot understand a decent, clean girl like herself, and that they have ruined her. Madelon's no tart and only loves once. Madelon threatens to reveal the murder to the police so that both Robinson and Madelon will be sent to jail. At this, Robinson resignedly says he just does not care anymore. "It's not just you," he tells Madelon. "I don't care about anyone else either. I don't want to be loved anymore. It disgusts me." Madelon fails to understand, so he puts his thoughts more harshly, adding that she is the rotten one who foolishly repeats what everyone else says and believes with everyone else that love is the cure for all life's misery and makes the sordid horrors of life easier. The world he has seen prevents him from ever believing such nonsense again. "You want to eat rotten meat? With love sauce? Does that help it go down?" he snaps at her. Enraged now, Madelon pulls out a revolver and shoots her lover 3 times before jumping from the cab and escaping into the dark. They have no choice but to take the mortally injured friend home and watch him die, with Bardamu ineffectually trying to help him go more easily. Once dead, Robinson seems a stranger to them. someone who had come from a horrible country and you wouldn't have dared to speak to. The body is taken to the police station, and the incident labeled a crime of passion. Bardamu and the others head to a bar when the end of the night approaches, just before dawn. As the novel draws to a close, Bardamu's final thoughts are of all the people preparing to wake up for the morning workday. They, too, will all have to die someday. How will they go about it, he wonders. At the bar, Gustav, the policeman, accidentally overturns the stove and spills the coals on the floor. Gustav wants to show them his fire dance ritual, but the scientist, Dr. Paraprine, will not let him.